Let's talk about resting. According to the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, the standard adventuring day is supposed to have 2 to 3 short rests, and 1 long rest at the end. This is to deal with the 6 to 8 encounters per adventuring day. Theoretically, this is what Wizards of the Coast kept in mind when they were trying to make balanced classes. Some classes get powerful resources, but only get them back on long rests. Some classes get good, but not overwhelming resources, and get them back on short rests. And ideally, this is what makes a long rest class have to carefully consider when the appropriate time is to use their limited resources. While short rest classes can use theirs much more frequently without worrying about being caught in a pinch without their resources available. But if you've played a 5th edition campaign or two, you might be thinking to yourself, 6 to 8 encounters? That sounds like a lot. Well, that's because it is a lot. Unless you're crawling through a dungeon, having that many encounters every day you adventure, it's a bit hard to pull off. Especially if you're trying to world build, and you're trying to have this many encounters just naturally happen in any circumstance where the party would be considered adventuring. The Dungeon Master's Guide offers a way around this, where they say, just have fewer, but more difficult encounters. And many DMs, myself included, like the idea of encounters being tough enough to give the players a real sense of danger, and few enough so that it doesn't take up a month's worth of sessions just to get through one adventuring day. But when you do that, you end up with only a couple of encounters, and that swings things drastically into the favor of the long rest classes. After all, if you're playing a long rest focused class, and you only have a couple of big fights, then you can go full out with your resources every fight and still have some to spare. You don't have to worry about if you'll have enough for next time. If you're playing a short rest focused class, and the party only has a couple of big fights each adventuring day, you won't be able to do as much as the long rest crew during this whole day, even if you had all your resources every fight, because there would only be 2 fights. And that's not to talk about the fact that the party usually doesn't like to rest at all, unless it's a long rest. Short rests in standard D&D are an entire hour, even though that's a lot less time than the 8-hour long rest, and you don't have a limited number of times you can use it in a day like a long rest. The fact remains that it stops the progress the party is making for a whole hour, and it makes them vulnerable for that time. The end result is, short rest focused classes don't get the resources through the day like they need to with the standard rules and a typical game. While they may not have been initially intended to fix this issue, let's take a look at the alternate rules for resting and see if they can help us with this issue. For reference, let's take a look at the standard rules of resting. Page 186 of the Player's Handbook states that you need at least 1 hour of doing nothing more strenuous than eating, drinking, reading, or treating wounds to have a short rest. You get all of your short rest abilities back, and you can roll hit dice to heal. A long rest is 8 hours long. At least 6 of those 8 hours have to be spent sleeping. 2 spent doing non-strenuous stuff, with the caveat that you can do something stressful, like traveling or dealing with an ambush in the middle of the night, but that has to take up less than an hour of the total rest time. You get all of your short and long rest abilities back, half of your hit dice if you use them, and you go back to full health. But you can only long rest once every 24 hours. Now let's look at the 2 options the Dungeon Master's Guide gives you. The first option is Epic Heroism. It makes short rests only 5 minutes, and long rests only 1 hour. It also says that you might want to limit things a little bit by only letting spellcasters regain half of their spell slots on a long rest, and to only have 5th level and lower spells be able to be regained by that 1 hour long rest, while it would take a whole 8 hours to get the higher level spells. So at first glance, this may seem to be great for short rest focused classes. After all, 5 minutes is next to nothing, so players should be getting a short rest after every combat. But while the standard time of 1 hour for a short rest may not seem to be worth it to the whole party, and while they may feel like it would drag things down to keep short resting whenever the fighter uses his action surge, they'll probably have a different reaction when that same 1 hour time can get them all of the short rest abilities, all the long rest abilities, full health, and most, if not all, of their spell slots that they use back. In the end, I suspect that this mode would actually make the party slower, if nothing else, with them constantly resting 1 hour to get all of their goodies back after doing anything remotely taxing. Next is Gritty Realism. This makes a short rest 8 hours, and a long rest an entire week. This may or may not fix the short rest issue. Short rests will happen every night, and a long rest is something that the party will need to do intentionally, and that seems like a massive buff to short rest classes. But that would only really be a buff to them if the party adventures for 3 or more days before taking a week off to rest. But there are some storytelling advantages to this. You can now spread out your encounters over the course of days instead of having to cram all those encounters into one day. This does make dungeon delving a bit of a chore though, and players may end up taking days to weeks clearing one out. Also, this will put far more stress on your group when it comes to time-sensitive things. If the world-ending event will happen in 2 days, but your wizard needs 5 days in order to get his highest level spell slots back, that's stressful. Whether that's something you want in your game, though, is up to you. So the big question here is, do either of these really help the problem with short rests? As is usual for these sorts of things, the answer is, it depends. I do like the idea behind Gritty Realism, not only for giving players 6 short rests before they complete a long rest, but also the idea that they will have to use hit dice to heal every day, and can't just fix being stabbed 37 times in the chest with 6 hours worth of sleep. But this variant does lend itself to slower games, and the party needs to be okay with the fact that spellcasters won't be able to get all of their spells back every day, and they may be in a pinch if they spent their biggest stuff on an encounter that ended up not being the most important encounter of the week. Also, low-level play will feel like it's dragging on compared to standard low-level play, when your first-level cleric can only cast 2 spells per week. Epic Heroism doesn't seem to be what we want either, especially since it seems like it just means everyone's going to take 1-hour breaks between fights if you use it. But there might be something we can use here. Let's make our own rest variant. Let's take that short rest from Epic Heroism. It's only 5 minutes, so unless you have to jump back into the action immediately after the fight, you're probably going to get one. If we make this change to short rests, while keeping long rests at the normal 8-hour length, and we need to make sure there are at least 3 to 4 fights per day, that should hopefully mean that everyone gets to rest between them. We should also cap the number of short rests to a maximum of 3 per day, since that's what the game was balanced around, and that should keep the players from abusing the system too much. With this way, the short rest crew gets their 3 to 4 short rests per day, the long rest crew will still get their goodies back every day, and you don't slow things down for people who want a fast-paced game. Now, I have yet to have an opportunity to test this variant out, but it's on my list of things to do for my next 5e campaign. So that's my take on short rests. What works out for you? Do you think that this is a good solution to make sure that the short rest crew doesn't fall behind? Or do you have an option that just works better for your table? Let me know in the comments below.
Thank you for watching DM Dimitri. Have some great games.